All right. Hello, everyone. This is another rousing evening. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books Presents Online. Shani Mootoo, Ian Williams with Lucy Jane Bledsoe. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We are celebrating 51 years this year. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Shani, Ian, Lucy Jane, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We have adapted to the current situation and are still bringing you the things that you love the most about Left Bank Books with curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world even. So no matter where you are joining us, you can get a copy of one of these beautiful books sent to you. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and make the world and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Shani, Ian, Lucy Jane, and Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you or for any of your friends. The holidays are fast approaching at left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff here through the most unusual of times. It also allows us to keep this event series going. So if you do like these events, please do consider supporting them. And if you already have the book that you were looking for tonight, you can also make a donation to the Left Bank Books Foundation at lbbfound.org. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the event, so you can type your questions as a comment at any point in time throughout the event, and we will get to those at the end. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. And our books for this evening. Polar Vortex by Shani Mootoo. Polar Vortex is a seductive and tension-filled novel about Priya and Alex, a lesbian couple who left the big city to relocate to a bucolic countryside community. It seemed like a good way to leave their past behind and cement their newish, later-in-life relationship. But there's leaving the past behind, and then there's running away from awkward histories. And Joe Mino, the author of Marvel and a Wonder, says powerful, fraught, and inventive. And Reproduction by Ian Williams. Reproduction tells a crooked love story in which love takes strange, winding paths and grows in a context shaped by community, family, long-standing friendships, and fleeting interactions that leave their mark on us forever. Felicia, a 19-year-old student from a West Indian family, and Edgar, the lazy-minded and impetuous heir of a wealthy German family, meet by chance when their ailing mothers are assigned the same hospital room. And Electric Literature says polyphonic and big-hearted. And Lava Falls by Lucy Jane Bledsoe. Traveling for ways to believe in themselves and the world, the spirited and heart-driven people who populate these stories find surprising pockets of hope. Refusing to buckle under the pressures of family and political traumas, the sojourners in this collection are unified by themes of creative expression and of love, how we define it, how we are impelled by it, and how we are lifted by it. And more about our authors. Shani Mootoo is a novelist, poet, and visual artist. Her novels include Moving Forward Sideways Like a Crab, longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize and shortlisted for a Lambda Literary Award. Valmiki's Daughter, longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. He Drowns, She in the Sea, longlisted for the Dublin Impact Award. And Sirius Blooms at Night, shortlisted for several prizes, including the Giller Prize, and longlisted for the Man Booker Prize. She is also a recipient of a Chalmers Arts Fellowship and the Dr. James Duggan's Outstanding Mid-Career Novelist Prize. Poet, short story writer, and novelist Ian Williams was named one of 10 Canadian writers to watch out for by CBC in 2018. His poetry has been shortlisted for the Griffin Poetry Prize and the Robert Croach Poetry Book Award. He won the Danuta Gleed Literary Award for his short stories. Williams holds a PhD in English from the University of Toronto and is currently an assistant professor of poetry in the creative writing program at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. Reproduction, his debut novel, was a finalist for the Amazon First Novel Prize, was a CBC Spring and Black History Month pick, and dubbed one of the buzziest books of 2019 by Chatelaine magazine. And Lucy Jane Bledsoe is an award-winning author of fiction and nonfiction, including the novels A Thin Bright Line, and The Big Bang Symphony, and the adventure essay collection The Ice Cave. She has traveled the length of the Grand Canyon, skied through Yellowstone National Park, kayaked and hiked in Alaska, and voyaged several times to Antarctica. She lives in Berkeley, California. And now I am very pleased, happy, and wonderfully just thrilled to welcome Shani Mootoo, Ian Williams, and Lucy Jane Bledsoe for Left Bank Books. If everyone at home would please give them a hearty round of applause. Here you all are.
Hey.
Hello.
Thank you, Shane.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be doing this event because Left Bank Books is one of my top favorite bookstores in the country. And I always say, I've told Shane, I've told Chris, I think you have the best fiction collection of any bookstore in the country. I go in there and I just want to come home with a million books. And they're not just the same novels you see everywhere. That's what I love. And so, yeah, I'm real pleased to be here in conversation with Shani and Ian, and I have lots to talk about, so I'm looking forward to it. I read both of your books, most recent books, very recently, and I absolutely loved them. It just was such a balm to read such creative, unique work at this time in history. So thank you for the gifts of that.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just got to start with titles. I find titles really, really challenging, and you both have such amazing, and they're just, your titles, Reproduction and Polar Vortex, they're so potent and intense titles, and I'm wondering how you chose them and whether you find choosing titles challenging as well.
You want to go ahead, Ian?
I unmuted myself. You know, I love a good title too, and this comes from the poet in me, right? So, and poetry gives you many opportunities to title something, right? From the poem level to sections and all of that. But Reproduction is one of those big grand titles that maybe people would shy away from. You know, it sounds a little bit abstract and stuff. And you remember that period like a few years ago where every book was like somebody's wife, like, you know, the so-and-so's wife or the bone keeper's wife and all of that. I mean, there are those titles that go in and out of fashion. But I had sort of a grand ambition for this book. And I wanted it to be about like families and generations, but also that slightly clinical touch of that word reproduction. And also the book tries to reproduce itself as well. So the alternate title for it was just The Sex Talk. And there are sections in there called The Sex Talk, right? So I got to use both titles.
Cool.
Well, for me, Polar Vortex, I do have that same kind of interest, poetic interest in titles. And the way I arrived at this one, so my novels in the past have always sort of gone, the stories have gone run between Trinidad and Canada. And I was at a dinner with V.S. Naipaul at a few years ago, just before he died. And he had said to me, why are you always writing about, you know, what he said was snow, coconut tree, snow, coconut tree. And he challenged me to write what I didn't know. And which is quite the opposite of what we're always told, right? Or what we tell, you know, new writers, write what you know. And one of the things I found when I moved from the city to the countryside, well, in the countryside, you're really faced with weather in a different way than, you know, in the city, where basically the weather is taken care of for you by the city. And in the countryside, you're left on your own. You have to, you know, going out onto the streets and so on. Nobody's salting regularly and that sort of thing. And one of the first winters down here in Prince Edward County, where I live, there was, in fact, the polar vortex effect. And we had a snowstorm, an ice storm that lasted many, many hours. And the ice was like, you know, like so thick and really casing the cars, and you had to chip really hard. And I thought this is a good exercise for me. I'm going to try to write this in a Trinidadian accent, as it were, but what I'm seeing around me. Yeah.
I think Lucy's no stranger to snow and ice, right? Antarctica twice or something.
Yeah, no, I'm not. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think probably more than half of the titles of my books have been changed. The publisher refuses to use the title I choose. And it's very painful because I'm not a poet like both of you are, but a title is so important. I'll have this title that I really care about. And they're like, no, it won't work. You'll get it in your contract, something like, that you, maybe if you're lucky, you get to have a discussion about the title, but there's like explicitly there's language that you don't get to decide. My very first book was also a collection of short fiction like Lava Falls, and it also had a novella. We were talking about novellas a minute ago, and the novella in it is called The Place Before Language. And I cared a lot about that title and what it meant to me, about what these characters were going through and feeling. So I wanted to call the whole book that. And the publisher changed the book to the title of that book. It is, to this day, Sweat. And Ian, you were just talking about fads and stuff. It was at the time Dorothy Allison's Skin had just come out. That wonderful Australian novel, I'm blanking on the author, named Bone. So, I think they were trying to sort of go with that somehow, but it's difficult, So, but I got to choose. That was always the title for this book. That's the name of the novella, and it takes place in the Grand Canyon in the near future. And right now, the Grand Canyon has been the current administration in this country is trying to open it up to uranium mining. Yes. And they are also there's a huge sexual harassment case was racking the whole Park Service in the U.S. and centered basically in the Grand Canyon. So for 2 years, there was no Park Service at all patrolling the Grand Canyon. It's just this wild thing. So Lava Falls to me just represented that that history that's now sort of frozen, and yet because lava is this thing that's become a solid, and yet it was molten and moving at one time. So that one I got from the beginning. I got to keep it.
Do you find that having had the title from the beginning, it influenced what you wrote?
Like Shani, I actually think like I hold on to a title pretty much from the beginning, right? Like the thing that you call the document, right? Whatever you call it in Word is pretty much the thing that it's eventually becomes for me. And I think titles are kind of malleable in the sense that books, just like kids, right? You name a kid Jessica, and the kid will the name will sort of influence, it'll go back and forth, right? Jessica becomes the personality of that kid. I think the book grows into that title as well.
So did you just say, Ian, that you usually pick the title from the very beginning and it sticks? Is that what you said?
I kind of know what it is. I have a general sense of what it is. Some things, I mean, it's not a perfect record, right? But for the next book, the next 2 books, I know what they are, and yeah, I think they're going to stick. Yeah.
I mean, for me,
I know what it is for me from the start as well. But for you, Lucy, having had this be the first one that you get to have that's yours personally, I mean, it's such a personal thing, the title, that I was wondering about you as well. Did you find that it then influenced what you wrote, how you wrote?
No, I don't think so, actually. I mean, I think, even before a publisher, I have got to have my other choices for some books too, but it's just often is. But yeah, I find that I change the title constantly while I'm writing. I mean, in the process of writing, I'll start out, it'll have a title. I must change it 5 or 6 times before I even submit it anywhere. So that's always in flux for me. I mean, I'm working on a novel right now that's, I thought was about basketball, and in fact, it's about conversion therapy. So stories move a lot while I'm doing drafts, and so the title moves with it. Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you all about structure too. Someone once said to me a long time ago that a short story is always about one moment, this sort of defining moment. And I love that idea. I find it's not exactly true, but it's an idea that helps me a lot in writing. Even novels, if I can try to figure out in a novel, what is the moment the story is about? It helps me structure the story. And it's not, as I say, it's in the end, there's several moments, even a short stories about, but I like the idea. One thing I admire so much about both of your novels is they're both about decades. They cover a lot of time and the evolution of relationships, and that's really hard to do, and you both do it so compellingly and effectively. And I wondered how you did that. You just you have this big length of time.
Well, Lucy, I came out of a visual arts practice where at the time when I was making work in the 90s and began writing then, quite by accident, because a publisher asked me to write something for them, and that was not my intention. And out of that conversation with that publisher came Serious Blooms at Night. I had no idea how to write. And what I did was I basically based my writing on how I would make a visual art piece. And the work was always very experimental. And, you kind of, you don't go into, I didn't go into my work at the time, my visual art work, knowing what I wanted to arrive at. That was an exploration and a discovery. And all my books have begun like that. If I know the end of a story, I'm very, very excited about it, and I figured it out in my head, I lose interest the next day. It's not going to get written. And so in this story, basically it started with a voice. Once I began to write something for someone else, a voice took over and I began to follow that voice. Once I got the voice in my head, it was this person who was just worrying herself, and I figured out what she was worrying about. And the whole story, yes, it spans decades, but it actually is in the present time of the novel. It's 12 hours. It's one day, one daylight day, And I found that her worrying, she had to be worrying about something, that was, it's not just, oh, this guy is coming to visit and I never told my partner about him. But there had to be stories, and it simply grew like that. There came a point where her worrying and her deceptions and prevarications and so on became a little annoying to the writer of the book, and I had to shut her up. And so I introduced her partner.
Mm-hmm.
Her partner's voice. But what her partner does is reveals her even more. Yes. And that I didn't know that I was going to do that. And by the time I finished, I thought, wow, that really worked nicely and confirms for me that I mustn't know what the heck I'm doing at first.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you there. If you know all the way to the end there's no puzzle, there's no mystery. And readers too can pick up like the sort of absence of energy in this book. It feels like a formula, right? You go for it and you know where the ending is from the beginning because it's already there. But ideally, you want those characters to be in tricky and difficult situations, just like we are in life, and find our ways out of them, right? With just ingenuity and luck and all of those things. But I guess, Lucy, like the question is like, where's the starting point for these? And I think a moment is really key. It's the voice, what Shani said there. It's a character, like I found myself asking in the early drafts here, whose story is this? Because it seemed to be between a couple of people. And in the end, it was the story of many people, right? Like everybody has their own preoccupations throughout the whole of reproduction, right? A middle-aged divorced man has his obsessions, and a wealthy but lazy German privileged man, and a black female immigrant. So, and the teenagers and the kids, even the kids, right? Hendrix is worried about his ant farm. He has his obsessions as a kid. But I think the other thing that's really critical for starting reproduction is it begins with a situation, what you called a moment there. And the situation was like, how do these people come together? They're both assigned to a hospital room because their moms are sharing it, and they would never meet under any other circumstance. And so given that, what could happen going forward, right? That situation.
And what's kind of amazing about both of your books is and Shani, yours starts with this unlikely situation of Priya, a lesbian, getting in this relationship with Prakash and not somehow be able to extract herself from it. They're both very unlikely relationships. And yeah, Ian, in your book, it's this Trinidadian, very young woman with this older white German guy, and it's like, you're not going to believe this, and yet you convince the reader. And that's what's so compelling and seductive about your books, is you actually convince the reader as you go. It's the voice. And I love that. I mean, it was a big challenge you each took on.
Yeah, it has the effect of, like, you come home and you say, you'll never believe who I met today. I was just like, waiting on the bus, and I started talking to this person. And for real, the kinds of people that we encounter, some of them stick, many of them don't. But there's nothing too unbelievable to kind of, readers are willing to believe it, because life is even more unbelievable.
Yeah.
That is one. Oh, sorry, carry on.
No, I was just saying true.
Well, one of the things that I have found with this book, I've had a few people, sort of write in on Instagram or so, and to say that it was their story as well. So the lesbians who from the Caribbean and so on, and so I think that it's not a really unlikely story. I think coming from backgrounds like that, it's very, very possible that a person leaving home, home being the Trinidad for me, comes up and knows that she's lesbian, but nobody back home knows that. And you don't have the sense that just because you've moved to a different place, you are free to do what you want to do. You don't know who's looking, and you don't know what you are, who you are, and you're trying to discover it. And this is what Priya is trying to do. And so she does. One of the things that I really enjoyed about writing this is how people live their lives. They experiment, they do all kinds of things that in a way to try to help them know who they might become, because they don't know who they are. They're bound with all these rules at first, and then how do they free themselves? But later in life, you meet someone, you get together, and so many people, you get together with someone early, and then later on you break up with them and you get together with somebody later on, and there's jealousy, and it's kind of like, well, you can't really be jealous of that. I became the person that you love because of that, all of that past. And that's one of the things that I really enjoyed playing with this here. But it still torments Priya, Priya's past still torments her, even though she's saying to Alex, yeah, but we can't be mad at each other's pasts. We must have had pasts.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing I like about both of your books. There's a lot I like about both of your books, but the characters are complex. There's no easy explanations for who anyone is. There's no sort of freebies emotionally or culturally, no shortcuts. It's like these characters are so full and conflicted in a way that you want characters to be, because that's what human beings are.
Yeah, and indeed, like when you have a lot of space in a book, and when you have these sort of multi-decade kinds of books, you can see the extent of character change really pronounced, because I don't think our identities are stable. I don't think the person you are at 19, Felicia at 19, is the same Felicia in her 50s, right? There's a lot of change that happens in those 30, 40 years or so. And it's important to acknowledge that. I think people too, with sexuality, in Shani's book, this idea that it's fixed and determined, and it can't be, it can't expand and grow and be interrogated, right? So,
I've sort of jumped ahead of myself. I have so many questions for you all, but this is sort of related. Ian, I read interviews that both of you did with various people just in preparation for this, and there's a comment you made that really intrigued me, and you said, if you spend enough time with someone, I guess you asked a question. Do you fall in love with them? Is that true?
I think maybe you don't get all the way to love in terms of like you want to marry this person, right? But I think there's a great value to sort of being locked into a relationship with people long term. It's how
Like
empathy
Felicia
forms,
and
right?
You mean like
What's
Felicia
that?
and Edgar? They're locked
Like
because
Felicia.
they have a child together.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And so there's a kind of dynamic, even if the person is unpleasant or whatever, being with a person long term. Or even like think of like work situations, right? Where you're working with someone who is unpleasant at first, but year 2, year 3, year 4, you get to understand how that unpleasantness works. It's not just a broad blanket of unpleasantness. It's certain things really provoke that person. And in a way that we come to like dismiss people too quickly. Also like with online dating and stuff, right? The friends who do this and whatnot, you give someone one shot, one date to prove themselves to you. And if they don't, you're on to the next person. And I think we need a little bit to be slower and a bit more generous with people. And you spend long enough with anybody, I think you could learn to like them, if not love them.
Do you think your character Felicia learned to love or like Edgar ever?
I think that's complicated, right? There's things that are wrapped up with, I could help this man and I sort of pity him and he could do better. And why doesn't he just try hard to do? And what is my duty to another human being? All those things, right, that interact. And some people have more patience for men like Edgar. And some folks would be like, it took till Felicia for him to sort of pair up significantly with someone.
Mm-hmm. Shani, one thing about your book that's unique and kind of cool is how it's a novel of interiority. You know, the characters who we have Alex's point of view a little bit. We have mainly Priya's. I think we get some of Prakash's too, don't we? At a certain point.
A little bit at the end.
A little bit at the end, yeah. And
he kind of almost reveals more about Priya than about himself in what goes on with him.
Yeah.
By him saying, don't you remember this? And then the reader gets to know, oh, wait a minute, what she said back then was either, misremembered or...
Right, yeah. I mean, what's so cool about all that interiority is you get to see, as in real life, how all these characters, their thoughts about themselves and about other people is totally mismatched with the other people's thoughts about them and themselves. But not only that, you do this thing that I love in novels when the reader actually knows more about what's going on with the characters than the characters know. I thought you did that really well. I don't want to reveal anything, but there's stuff that what's going on, and you're supposed to know it. I think. I don't think you're being.
Oh yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Some people have said that there was too much interiority, but it really is not a novel that's plot driven. Like all my novels, really. I mean, it does follow eventually. This is one of the things I love about writing like this. You don't know where you're going. You get to the end, you see where you've gone, and you can come back and strengthen that, or remove things, basically strengthen it. But it's not really driven by plot. It's really about what's going on in this character's mind, how she is justifying her actions, her present actions, how she's justifying her past. And it's really about that, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I wonder, the challenge, Lucy, is when you've got these beautiful exteriors that are going on. So Shani's book set in the country for you, and you've got these like Grand Canyon and all these great things happening externally. Yeah. Then how do you make the inside as appealing as just give me the scenery, right? Just show me what's going on inside.
That's such a good question, and I struggle with that, especially writing about Antarctica, because I got to go to Antarctica with the United States Antarctic Program a few times. I do a lot of science writing, and I got to go as an artist and stay in the camps with the scientists to write my novel, The Big Bang Symphony. And the place is so extravagant and so grand and so gorgeous that it's like there's no way you can write well about it. It's like you either understate or your overstatement sounds ridiculous. So what I tried to do is just, really stay with the characters. And I mean, what I wanted to write about in that novel is how that grandiosity affected human relationships, because it does. I mean, everybody goes to Antarctica. All the people who go to Antarctica, which is basically small communities of scientists, extraordinary things happen to their lives. Very few stay in their marriages. I mean, it just gets crazy.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to show that without, purple writing and overwriting and all that. And that was definitely the biggest challenge. And the same thing with the Grand Canyon. Although the Grand Canyon, what I did is I put 6 women on a raft and sent them down. And this is at a time when there was no one patrolling, no park services. In the near future, when everything's kind of come to pieces, it felt easier then. The Grand Canyon is so iconic that, so I guess I struggled with not making it be a cliche. But yeah, I hope it worked.
Right.
Description in Polar Vortex was very much everything, since it's from Priya's point of view, everything outside is to justify her point of view. So she sees the cupboard door open in the kitchen, and it's about her relationship with Alex. Why doesn't Alex close the door? Okay, but today is not a day to make a fuss about it. Kindness begets kindness.
Yeah.
And then the only real big descriptions there are the landscape, the frozen landscape with the dead birds in the ice, and the drive through the town that really has that feel of barrenness. And that I have to say that was my attempt to respond to V.S. Naipaul and to learn to write the Canadian landscape and not always, fall for the nostalgia of the Trinidad landscape, which I know so intimately, and describing a place that you are no longer in but once loved can bring that grand writing out of you. And I wanted to find another way, and that's the description in the novel. That's what's exterior. But I think it's
so complicated.
The purpose of the barrenness of the lives.
I really like to write about people's relationship to landscapes, though, and so sometimes in grand landscapes or otherwise. But I love thinking about how a landscape actually changes a person, and not just how other people change each other. So I often that's what my stories are about in the end. So I do like to do, yeah.
And it happens really quietly, right? So most of reproduction is set in a suburb. And the suburb, there's no romance there. There's no looking back, as Shani's saying, towards a place that we once loved. The suburb feels very functional and very kind of family driven and very normative, right? The suburb. And so to bring this place alive, we could write about cities, we could write about more austere landscapes or dramatic landscapes. And then to bring something alive that is as sort of humdrum as the suburbs was really the challenge of reproduction here. And you do find that what you're saying about the environment changing people, when Oliver's marriage falls apart and he moves into this house in the suburb where he's renting to Felicia, what does it mean when everybody on the street is going through a divorce as well? Or the family values that are promised of the suburbs no longer really hold true. And so he's got this garage full of rubble, right, from his past life. And the sort of poignancy of that is to see that played out in the suburbs, the ashes or the remnants of the ideal marriage and family played out in this house.
I'm glad you mentioned the garage, because I wanted to bring that up. It's like, yes, it's the suburbs, which we think of as a very dull landscape, but you have these intricately described spaces in your novel. I mean, there's the garage, which is one of the most intense ones, where Army, cuts people's hair and has all kinds of businesses he's running. There's the upstairs of Oliver's house.
Right.
There's Edgar's house. But really, I could see it so clearly. You just really described these spaces wonderfully, and they were very alive.
In the suburbs, right? I mean, there are strip malls and strip clubs and all sorts of things in the suburbs that we attend to. But yeah, that garage space there, where if you're a teenager in the suburbs and you're looking for a little piece of your room of your own, you know, that garage is, you know, your barber shop and your weight room and your, you know, it's everything you need in there. Yeah, you know, where your band rehearses.
It's interesting to me because, you know, David Chariandi's novel Brothers, it's about the suburbs as well, right? But a different kind of suburbs. But one of the things that I find very interesting is that many of us who have immigrated to North America, especially people of, what's that? Oh, water.
It's Thanksgiving, you know. You can't celebrate with a glass of water.
We can all drink.
Cheers. So what I was going to say is we tend to move into cities, particularly those of us who are of color. We move into the big cities, and those of us who are writing tend to write about the dramas of the cities amongst our own kinds of people as we rub up against different difference as well as oppressions. To write outside of the cities, I find is a bit of a challenge. You really have to stretch yourself to know something very, very different.
So true, so true. Like in Canada, all those Toronto books versus in the States, all those New York books. But there are whole worlds beyond this, right? Yeah.
But cities are distracting. I feel like when you write outside of cities, you really have to fall back on your characters in a wonderful way. You can't buzz around in cars and, you know, have them drinking cocktails in bars, and you really have to like get true to the character.
That's right. That's right. What does life look like here? And I think your point is a good one there, Shani, about what does it mean for a Black man to write out like a nature novel, right? Yeah. Like they don't, people don't think we sort of occupy, we go for hikes and things like that. So, or what does it mean for like a white person to write about the ghetto, right? And so when we sort of do these exchanges of where we think people occupy, then we can actually see people rather than types.
Precisely. Yeah.
One thing that was interesting to me, you both had main characters who worked, well, okay, they were different. They cared a lot about compassion. Priya, in your novel, Shani, it felt very conscious and deliberate, where she tried to have compassion for people, which was interesting because she really tried to work out her relationship with both Alex and Prakash that way. With Felicia, Ian, in your novel, I think compassion came more easily. It's almost like she couldn't hold it back. In my opinion, she should have. I mean, she was taking care of people, but both of them had this awareness of compassion and making decisions from a place of love. And I think that's a much harder place to write from than to write about conflict and, you know, disconnect. And so I really think it's cool that you both had these characters who tried to connect via love, even though it fails, of course, for everyone all the time in a lot of places. Did you think about that consciously while you're writing, that these characters were?
I'm a little surprised to hear you say that about Priya and Alex. You know, in some ways, I feel the most honest person in the novel was Prakash, and I do feel that he really did love Priya. I mean, he was quite self-interested, and that's one of the things I wanted to show in the novel, is how people always have ulterior motives. I don't believe in my own personal sense of the world. I don't believe anyone is really you know, so idealistic. But Priya is bumbling through life, trying very, very hard to take care of herself, and in a way she comes first always. So I don't know. I hope I don't disappoint by saying that I didn't write a loving character.
Well, she's a little bit of an anti-hero, I'll give you that. but I feel like she was trying so hard.
She's very, very human. I think she's, my sense of her is that she is all of us. And I think, unlike what Ian was saying a little while ago, that idealistic, to me, it was idealistic of how we, perhaps we can love and we can, go through life looking for the good and so on, instead of like cutting things off. Like everything you said there, I could have turned around and said, yeah, but,
Fair enough. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Because this is what Priya, like that's what she says that she has more or less done. And I am a bit more cynical, and I like to think maybe realistic about us as human beings.
I think regarding the compassion point with Felicia, it seems effortless. I think they're the kind of vestiges of like Christianity and stuff that shape her being, right? What you were saying earlier, Shani, about you might leave a country or leave an island, but it still follows you, the expectations, someone might see you. And I think with Felicia, she's really playing that out, right? Like, what does it mean to be good? And it's Christianity is the model she falls back on. But two, I think the compassion also becomes evident because she has a child, and her own sorts of grudges and resentments for Edgar have to be kind of suppressed or masked or just like not spoken about, so that this child, who's really buoyant, Army, just really energetic and buoyant, cannot be embittered by her experience of men, right? So there's a little bit of that sacrifice of her feeling and her sacrifice of her own anger, so that her child can grow up just being himself, right? Yeah.
Shane,
I am back. This has been such an incredible conversation. I'm so happy to have been in the background of this the entire time. Yeah. Thank you all so much for this conversation. Thank you, Lucy, for asking such incredible questions, stimulating questions. But now, are you all ready for some audience Q&A?
Yeah.
Let's hear them. Yeah.
They're very difficult. So,
Okay.
All right. So the first questions are going to come from Joseph, which actually the first comment was about some of the incredible reviews that Polar Vortex has been receiving from readers. And that reminded me that I read little blurbs for both of Shani and Ian's books and forgot to read one for Lucy Jane's book. So really quickly, the Toronto Star says, riveting new collection, fully realized characters, stories that stick to your ribs. And the question that is going to prompt from this is, at what point do you read the reviews, the comments? Is that something that you do as an author, or is that something that you try to ignore as best as possible?
Really interesting. So I didn't used to read them in the past because a lot of them were behind paywalls. And I was like, that was just a reality there. And actually, I didn't really feel I won't like seek out a review, right? But I think like somewhere around like month 8 of reproduction, month 8, month 9 or so, when it was out in the world, I paid a bit more attention to them. Mostly because it was a way of like respecting a reviewer's time and thought. Like even if whatever I thought of it, whatever I disagreed of it, it was just like, here's someone's thought about the book, and I should attend to that. I can't sort of be flippant or dismissive about it. And so that's where I am right now. I think it's a pretty healthy place. It doesn't destroy me if someone says something bad. And it doesn't go to my head if I get a little, ping of dopamine if someone says something good. But I'm occupied enough with the thing that I'm doing with the new project or whatever that I can say, oh, okay, I can see how that landed with that person. Fair enough, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There's particularly about the idea that people have put time into creating a review, reading the book, and so on. Also, I'm on Instagram, and you often find little bits of interviews put on, with you tagged on them, and my publisher tends to respond and to like and so on. And I feel that I should also appreciate these things if they have tagged me, specifically. But I also don't seek out reviews. And if I have had an interview with someone and they send me, but I actually really, really enjoy having, these one-on-one sort of interviews that get very, very detailed. And I will read their reviews, but I don't seek them out. And I do get affected if they're not good.
I read my reviews. I mean, usually the publisher sends them. They collect them, the publicist at the publisher collects them. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a high when they say positive things. It can hurt if they say something negative, but I don't know. It's not a big issue for me. I'm not either way.
And feedback comes in so many ways, right? There's the classical review. Oh, sorry about that, Shay. There's the sort of standard classical review. But like what somebody says on Twitter or on Facebook or what have you, that feedback I like. When someone sends an email to you and says, usually those are good, right? I like to hear from readers that way. Yeah.
I love it when a reader writes and says, oh my God, your novel affected me in this way. And they describe the meaning of the book and it's completely different than what you meant. I love that. I love it. Just sort of takes its evolution of its own and it becomes this thing. Okay, great. It meant that to you and you loved it. Good.
Great.
The next question is very specifically for you, Ian. This is a question about reproduction. Joseph is wondering, what was the significance of the constant misspelling of Edgar's name in the present section of the book? Did it symbolize his cancer?
Right. So in part 4, what Joseph is referring to, hi Joseph, is Edgar's name starts to get spelled like E-D-G-E-R, E-G-D-R-R, E-E-E-E-E-R, right? So the name gets scrambled. And what happens there is, he does have cancer towards the end of the book. And the cancer starts eating away at his name. And there's a little bit of a surprise if you read carefully towards the very end of the book. In the last couple of pages, you will see the same thing happening again to someone. Yeah, good reading.
So my question for all three of you, since you all do work in a variety of mediums, be it poetry, short story, novel, novella, visual art, at what point in your head, like, do you form an idea and say, that's a novel, or like, that's going to be a poem? Like, when does that hit with your ideas, or does it sometimes change into a different medium?
Yeah, for me, it's like, I don't know. I don't have a set process. I do a lot of drafts of everything. So I'll start writing a story and usually I have a plan, but the plan changes constantly. So it's like, oh, this is a novel. And then I realize it's a short story, or then maybe it becomes a novel again. But so I can't go forward without sort of a plan for, like a blueprint for what I'm going to do, but it changes all the time. So, yeah.
For me, since I don't usually know where I'm going with a novel, when it begins, it may begin with an image, but it's a moving image, and there's sound, there's a voice, there are words attached to it. But what ends up being a photograph is there are no words. There are absolutely no words. If I begin to put it into words, this image that I'm seeing, and I begin to think, what is it that I have been photographing? Like, why am I doing this? They become sort of formulaic, but often it's just a static image, and I actually have to go in search of that image, like maybe a plant sticking out of the bushes or something. Not a plant, like a weed or something, you know. And it's absolutely that. There's nothing else. So one has sound and movement, and the other one is just an image. And I will follow those two things, those things. And poetry, a long, long time ago, I trained myself to pay attention to the sort of unconscious or subconscious little, little phrases buzzing in my head, and then to follow those, and not to just let them go away. And those are usually the beginning of something for me in poetry.
Yeah, you come to know over time, right? We have an idea, and the idea really doesn't may not have a shape, but the closer that you approach the idea as you walk towards it, you can start to see kind of what kind of idea it is. It's kind of like walking towards a tree from a distance, right? Like, you know, when you're 4 blocks away, you can say, oh, there's a tree over there. I can see a shape, green, there's some stuff. But as you get closer, you'll say, that's deciduous, that's coniferous. And as you get closer still, you'll say that's a maple, that's an oak. And I think as you kind of pursue an idea, its form becomes a bit clearer to you. But when they come, it's just something, oh, cool. What can I do with this? I'm just going to keep looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Suzanne about polar vortex. I love the nuance of the specifically Indo-Caribbean experience. In one of my favorite passages, I love that Priya is swooned by Alex's knowledge of differentiating between calypso, soca, and chutney. This is subtle. This is subtle and yet woven in so effortlessly, as in all of your novels. Are these subtleties an intentional choice that you imagine you will include in your process of writing an Indo-Caribbean character, or do they emerge slowly and unexpectedly as your writing of the novel progresses?
Who's this question from?
This is from Suzanne.
Okay, Suzanne, thank you very much. It's not something that I consciously set out to do. In this particular novel, I don't even remember if I'd done it in other novels, but in this particular novel, by the time I decided to include Alex and to include her voice, I was faced with a problem. She's white, and Priya is of South Asian background, Indian Trinidadian. And, you know, one of the first interviews done with me for a newspaper here, the interviewer was a woman of color, an Indian woman, who basically said that she felt that Priya was doing all the emotional, what was it she said? The emotional work.
Emotional labor?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. The emotional labor in the relationship. And I thought to myself, no, that's too easy. And in fact, I was very conscious of that, of not letting a racial thing play out so obviously between them. And I wanted Priya to meet a woman who was not going to exoticize her, but already knew something of her world. Now, there's a trick there. She could possibly have been, you know, a Caribbeanophile who knows everything about the Caribbean more than more than Priya herself. So these kinds of subtleties became very, very important to me. How not to allow Alex to be seen by the reader as that white woman who doesn't know anything and is like, you know, trouble for racially trouble. And at the same time, not to allow Priya to be a victim of race in the relationship, possibly in her community, but not in the relationship itself. And because that was not the story, and that was going to beleaguer the what I was really interested in.
Do we want to do, I think we have time for one more quick question. So this is another question from Joseph asking, how does a writer do your research now that the libraries are closed? And how has, I'll add on so you can have a choice between questions. How has the pandemic affected your writing process?
I'm curious what Lucy has to say about doing research here.
I do a lot of research for all of my writing, but honestly, most of it's online. So that hasn't changed that much. I used to spend a lot of time in the library, but now I have a lot of sources online that I research stuff. So the pandemic has affected my writing process only and not just the pandemic, all the traumas we're going through here. My attention span. I'm really good at concentrating deeply for a number of hours, and the number of hours I can actually sit down and write is greatly shortened by all the terrifying things happening right now. So that's including the pandemic. So that's the main way it's affected me. It hasn't really affected research, although I tend to do a lot of I go to my settings. I have to go to my settings. So if I'm writing about the Oregon coast, I have to go to the Oregon coast. If I'm writing about, Antarctica, I have to go to Antarctica. So obviously I'm not traveling right now, but I'm finishing a book about the Oregon coast. So that's working right now because here I am.
It's so interesting to me how we're all more or less saying the same things in our own way about our process and so on. Because I do work, if I have to do research, it's usually online. And the other thing is that I would go, like when I was writing Polar Vortex, I would go and drive the route that, the characters drove and that sort of thing. But the pandemic has not affected my writing so much and my artwork so much. In fact, it's almost allowed me to even concentrate more, in a spot. But the other things, it's funny, we're here in Ontario, but what's going on in the US is really, really on my partner is American, and not just because of that, but it's very much on our minds. And I find that very, very distressing. The other thing that has happened is the being shortlisted for the Gilla with this book. That it's kind of like now I'm sort of waiting for this period to be over so that I can breathe. And and also it's at around the same time as the election, so it's like these two heavy things. The election is bothering me far more than not just the election, but everything that's going on there. And here in Canada as well, we have our own troubles that parallel, but not remotely as intensely in the moment.
Yeah, agreed with you about sort of the presence of America always up here in Canada. It's hard not to be affected by it and sort of hope for the best and wish for the best, but also to feel in a precarious situation, right? Daily, every time I read my New York Times, like morning blast there, right? It's like, what's going to happen now? And it would be nice to just kind of, it would be nice if the news returned to that abstract level that it had, a few years ago. But I think more and more we're seeing the kinds of entanglements that we have between these big macro things that seem to happen in our daily lives. There's no more of this comforting middle. And even as Canadians, we can't separate ourselves from just like that gravitational force of the US pulling the whole world behind it. So that's been sort of emotionally kind of always with us in a way that we have, like we're now carrying that burden all the time and that we don't even realize that it's weighing on us. Yeah, I definitely felt freer 3 years ago, 4 years ago, right? Than now.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for this conversation, for writing such incredible books. They are all three available for sale at left-bank.com. They are beautiful paperback, all three. So really wonderful, would look very nice on a bookshelf all next to each other. Um,
I want to say thank you, Sean, and to Left Bank. Thank you so much. Very nice to meet you, Ian, and wonderful questions. Great to meet you too, Lucy.
Nice to meet you both too. This was really fun. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Congratulations on being shortlisted and all the prizes that you all have won. So I'm certain that I'm not the first to tell you that. So. All right, well, have a great evening, audience. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.